Sheogorath is dead! All shall crumble before Jyggalag!
The era ends and the Greymarch begins. Obelisks of irrefutable order burst from the soil, cracking cobbles and uprooting plants in thrusts of inexorable determinism. Between the crystalline columns, a figure forged from equal parts silver and certainty strides toward the palace of New Sheogorath. Without question, knights of perfect order form a platinum phalanx behind their prince, ready to maim and kill and die in the name of order. They descend upon the Madhouse, galvanized by their master's zeal. How could the inhabitants of this wretched realm hope to quell their advance, when they couldn't even stifle their own psychosis? Jyggalag raises his symmetrical sword and shatters his realm, and his very self, carving new faces in his own many-faceted madness. He turns to peer over his shoulder at the desolation left in the wake of his march, and for a fleeting moment he savours his handiwork, before his curse inevitably triggers again, restarting his lunatic loop. His impenetrable silver shell turns soft and sallow. Pudgy pink flesh replaces his angular perfection. Frail and trembling, the mad god swaddles himself in a mantle of depression. How could his fellow princes be so ruthlessly sadistic? Did they not see the scope of his sorrow? Sheogorath rocks back and forth like a metronome, digging his brittle nails into his pale arms until they bleed. One final wound inflicted in this era's Greymarch. A Grummite in untarnished court finery climbs over the rubble of the palace, and brandishes Sheogorath's trusty staff. It shines with restored power, and the sight of it emboldens the Mad One. A smirk stretches across his wrinkled white face. The demon lords had conspired against him, and he would make them all pay. Of all the Daedra lords, their manifold manifestations and diverse spheres, there is one who has been robbed of his individuality, conspired against by his peers, and cursed to endure as the antithesis of everything his sphere of influence encompasses. After many, many years of hoarding obscure tomes on all things Daedric, I was baffled to find absolutely nothing on this overpowered prince. In my efforts to track down information on this condemned god, every path led to Sheogorath. I had heard rumours of the great library of Jyggalag, yet every Tamrielic library was sorely lacking in the J department. I found passing mentions of the Prince of Order, but that was it. I was caught in a maddening spiral, and the destination at the end of this descending maelstrom was the asylum. I felt the groping claws of the Madhouse on many dark nights in my study, especially since my recent return from Apocrypha. But once again, I'll resist his pull, for this is not a video on the Mad God. At least I thought it wasn't. Once again, my research took me away from my study and into the field. I took the frigid trade route through the Pale Pass, into the heartland of Dawn's Beauty. For many days I walked, until I at last came upon the banks of the Niben Bay. And there it was, the menhir of madness. The jewel faces of the maniac carven from stone. I scoured the shore for a ferryman, but encountered only mud crabs. And so, with my gear held precariously above water, I swam out to the remote isle. It somehow seemed fitting to enter the domain of Uncle Sheo, soaked and shivering. As I ascended the slope, leading to the gaping maw of the Mad God, the clear sky above began to fester. Indigo clouds rolled in, and veins of lightning cracked the firmament, which was inflamed and pulsating. I took shelter beneath the great grey teeth of Sheogorath's cracked visage. Many years had passed since I last took a stroll through the Shivering Isles, and I had been consumed by the fear that I would be trapped there forever. But I knew the only way to complete my research on Jyggalag was to find my way to the Perfect Prince's great library. I felt the warmth emanating from Sheogorath's yawning gullet. Between bouts of thunder overhead, I could almost hear echoes of distant screams, mingled with competing cries of laughter and lamentation. I leant closer, strained to listen, and from the roiling vortex of chaotic energy, a butterfly materialized and landed on the tip of my nose. Like an ambassador sent to deliver the most cordial of welcomes, it splayed its wings before my eyes, enveloping my vision, displaying in one glorious moment every conceivable concept, painted upon my mind canvas in omnicolour swirls, animated by the insect's rapidly flitting wings. And before I could compute the revelrous revelations, I was inhaled by the strange door, swallowed whole. I passed through the esophagus of Oblivion and fell into the rumbling stomach, ready to be digested by the gut enzymes of the asylum. Much like its master, the Shivering Isles are characterized by contradictory emotions. It is in a constant state of confusion. The skies shift from flushed and frenzied, overwhelmingly vivid and full of vigour, as if an inspired artist painted it with all the colours of the orbis, to sickly and dispirited, as if the life had been neglectfully left to drain from it like water through splayed fingers, with no real effort made to staunch the flow. This bipolar unpredictability even seeps into the flora and fauna. On one side, bright, proud mushrooms jut skyward, their stems meandering carelessly, unafraid to defy symmetry, growing as they please. On the other side, emaciated willows slump under the weight of their woe, despondent from the swamp water that offers no sustenance save for sadness. To think, according to Jyggalag, this realm was once a world of perfect order, which expanded across the seas of Oblivion with each passing era. But despite his bold claims, the only remnants of Jyggalag's perfect world are the dormant obelisks dotting the isles, and the ruins of his once great library, hidden within Knife Point Hollow. I'm writing a letter to the sovereign of the Shivering Isles, requesting an audience with the Mad God, a name I will most certainly not use in his presence. But knowing the infuriatingly elaborate bureaucratic process associated with obtaining Lord Sheogorath's attention, I won't hold my breath. I imagine that meeting will have to wait for a future, more in-depth video. As far as I can tell, there's no reason for such a lengthy process of paperwork and correspondence, other than the fact that the Mad God revels in the frustration of his subjects. I wonder if he's ever read Kafka. Alas, for this particular research into the identity Sheogorath would rather forget, I will instead focus my attention on the ruins of the Great Library, where I hope to find the supporting evidence for a rather controversial theory relating to the nature of Jyggalag. So I followed the root tunnels into the subterranean site of Jyggalag's library, where I'd be temporarily sheltered from anyone becoming aware of the sacrilegious secrets I was about to speculate on. Of the Daedra, only the Grey Prince of Order knew his nature, and he went mad in the knowing. Virtually everything we know about Jyggalag comes from the Champion of Cyrodiil's stay in the Shivering Isles. Lord Sheogorath's reign remains uninterrupted until, in the Mad God's estimation, the end of every era, which is when he transforms into Jyggalag and destroys his own realm, in an apocalyptic event called the Greymarch. Now, as we can deduce from a variety of sources, including Sheogorath, Haskell and Daius, time here does not function in the same certain way it does in the Mundus. Akatosh's influence does not breach the atmosphere of the asylum. The Mad God says,
Time is an artificial construct, an arbitrary system based on the idea that events occur in a linear direction at all times. Always forward, never back. Is the concept of time correct? Is time relevant? It matters not, one way or another. I fear that our time has run out. As I feared it would, my plan has failed. The Greymarch is upon us, and I must go.
And with that, Sheogorath transforms into Jyggalag. Only this Greymarch apparently unfolded differently to every prior march. Not even Jyggalag's imprisoned librarian Daius could see it coming. Daius's role in this story is far from over, but the Champion of Cyrodiil stopped the march before the realm could be fully demolished. When the march fails, Jyggalag has this to say.
Enough! I am beaten. The Greymarch
is ended. For millennia, this drama has unfolded, and each time, I have conquered this land, only to be transformed back into that gibbering fool, Sheogorath. It was not always so. Once I ruled this realm, a world of perfect order. My dominion expanded across the seas of Oblivion, with each passing princess, fearful of my power, cursed me with madness, doomed me to live as Sheogorath, a broken soul reigning in a broken land. Once each era, I was allowed my true form, conquering this world anew. And each time I did, the curse was renewed, damning me to exist as Sheogorath. You have ended the cycle. You now hold the mantle of madness, and Jyggalag is free to roam the voids of Oblivion once more. I will take my leave, and you will remain here, mortal. Mortal, king, god. It seems uncertain. This realm is yours. Perhaps you will grow to your station. Fare thee well, Sheogorath, Prince of Madness.
You may be wondering why I've jumped right to the end of Jyggallag's tale, for his words to the champion seem rather final. But don't forget Sheogorath's words from just before. Time is an artificial construct, eternally more relevant to the finite creatures of the mortal realm than it is to the inhabitants of Oblivion. The Prince of Order speaks of an end to the cycle, as if such things are as clear-cut as his adamantine shell. He claims to be free to take his leave, to roam the voids of Oblivion once more, yet he's been suspiciously quiet in the time that's passed since then, which is around 200 years by Tamriel reckoning. What I'm asserting, however, is that Jyggalag is deluded, and while he might have believed everything he said to the champion of Cyrodiil, he was completely wrong, and he is still completely mad. Before Sheogorath came to be, Jyggalag had been the Daedric prince of logical order and deduction. His realm had reflected that perfection, and the focal point of this perfect plane was Jyggalag's Great Library. According to Daius,
the Great Library was the height of logic and deduction. Contained within its walls were the logical prediction of every action ever taken by any creature, mortal or Daedric. Every birth, every death, the rise of Tiber Septim, the Numidium, everything, all predicted with the formula found within Jyggalag's library.
In order to manage such a wealth of knowledge, Jyggalag recruited, or perhaps created, a chamberlain named Daius of Mytheria. Mytheria, of course, is not a known place. Maybe it was the name for the Shivering Isles when Jyggalag governed it. Maybe it is merely a title provided to Daius so that he'd feel some sense of self, beyond his service to the Prince of Order. Whatever the case, Jyggalag made Daius immortal, and showed him how to use the information stored in the Great Library to predict all events. Together, the prince and his chamberlain became the masters of determinism, a notion that seems impossible within the Orbis, especially when we consider just how profoundly difficult Elder Scrolls are to read, and how princes like Hermaeus Mora, the Lord of Forbidden Knowledge, sees just how much responsibility comes with altering the flow of fate. If Jyggalag can deduce all eventualities, then he somehow did not see his own impending downfall. Jyggalag claims that the other Daedra lords conspired against him. The one other source that corroborates this conspiracy theory is loyal Daius, who says the other Daedric princes feared his power, so they conspired to transform him into that which he hated most, the essence of chaos itself. Now, I hate to be a skeptic, but we see time and time again in the mortal realm that narrators can be unreliable. Depending on the race and affiliation of the writer, accounts can vary wildly on the same events. Are we expected to believe that the deceitful Daedra are immune to the same scrutiny? And are we expected to believe this conspiracy theory that is posited only by the victim and the victim's chamberlain? If you've seen my video on Hermaeus Mora and his great deception, you'll know that it's not unheard of for the Daedric princes to conspire against one another. From the perspective of the Vestige, when tapping into the power of Mora's hidden glyphic, we can eavesdrop on a secret meeting between Mora, Veamina and Periite, when deciding what to do about the Prince of Paths, Ophelia. In this meeting, Veamina even states,
"You can't do this to another prince, or to the rest of us for that matter."
And while time is not linear for such deities, this would have taken place long after Jyggalag's curse by mortal reckoning. You'd think they might have referred to this precedent when deciding a fate for Ophelia, but no mention of Jyggalag or Sheogorath. I reject the notion that the princes ever teamed up against Jyggalag. I don't think they cursed him. If anything, I think they committed or institutionalized him. Seeing that his madness was tearing him apart at the seams, they put him in the asylum, where he could no longer spout so much nonsense about being the master of logical order and deduction. I believe that Jyggalag was always doomed to go insane. His sphere of order and determinism is simply impossible to achieve in the Mundus or in Oblivion. As is often the case, to fully grasp the roles of each of the original spirits, we need to look at the circumstances that facilitated the creation of the Orbis, and the monomyth is the most widely accepted account of the universe's foundation. There was a time, before time, when perfect order did actually exist, but it was so perfect that it could not be pondered or even perceived. It was ineffable, and so impossibly bright that any attempt to gaze at it would have instantly burned away. Even to imply that something could try to look upon its light at all is meaningless, for in order to be so unfathomably bright, relied on nothing else existing at all. I'm aware my efforts to describe this perfect order is pointless, because neither you nor I can comprehend it to begin with, so I'll stop explaining it before it drives me mad. The important thing to keep in mind is that when this perfect order existed, nothing else possibly could. No time, no space, no laws of physics or nature, no gods, just meaningless perfection. And this is why the interplay between two opposing primordial forces was needed for anything else to come into existence. Anu needs its Padamai, order needs chaos. Padamai created contradiction. Padamai refuted Anu's irrefutable incandescence. With Anu's light and Padamai's darkness, all the marvels of the Orbis were able to take their own forms. The Altmeri creation story written in the monomyth details this interplay. At first, the Orbis was turbulent and confusing, as Anwiel's ruminations went on without design. Aspects of the Orbis then asked for a schedule to follow, or procedures whereby they might enjoy themselves a little longer outside of perfect knowledge. So that he might know himself this way too, Anu created Auriel, the soul of his soul. Auriel bled through the Orbis as a new force called Time. With time, various aspects of the Orbis began to understand their natures and limitations. And so, the interplay of Anu and Padamai allowed the Atada, the original spirits, to take shape, but everything that occurred from this point on would be cursed, blessed by variation. Such is the essential role of Padamai, who is Sithis, who is Lorcan. It was Lorcan whose divine spark conjured the idea for the mortal realm, the Mundus, and it was to be a place of limitation. As the ultimate heart of the world creation story states, this world contained more limitations than not, and was therefore hardly a thing of Anu at all. What I find interesting is that in Anuic cultures, like in Somerset, limitation is associated with Lorcan Sithis. In some ways this is justified, because it was Padamai's contradiction, Padamai's limitation, that allowed the brightness of Anu to mutate into something complex and meaningful. But if we look at it from another perspective, ever since the creation of the Orbis, the only way to achieve any kind of order is to impose limits. The only alternative would be to remove all variation and return to a primordial state where only Anu exists. The mortal realm is governed by the laws of time and nature, thanks to gods like Akatosh and Ifri, and as a result, the mortal realm has some notion of order. A mortal's birth comes with the guarantee of death. That's a certainty, with a few Psijic exceptions. But the involvement of the Aedra in creation gives the Mundus some rules, some limitations, some order. Even still, maintaining order in a realm reeking of Sithis is enough to constantly challenge the weakened gods involved in it. Whereas, outside of the mortal realm, in the turbulent waters of Oblivion, chaos flows utterly unchecked. As we've already mentioned, Akatosh's laws of time don't apply in Oblivion, or in the Shivering Isles, nor do the laws of nature, which are secured by the Earthbones in the Mundus. We've already provided some direct quotes on just how irrelevant the rules of the mortal realm are in Oblivion, but for good measure, let's hear it from Jyggalag's librarian too.
Time and place are nothing. Constructs of a feeble mortal mind attempting to categorize and understand the world around it. If you were one of the fortunate few, you would one day understand and accept this. However, you are not, and you will not.
No place, no physics, no time, just Sheogorath's subjective whims holding the Isles together. Yet Jyggalag still believes it's possible to govern a sphere of logical order and deduction. He went insane because there was no other alternative. Just look at Akatosh, one of the most complex spirits involved in creation. There is the Nordic Alduin, destroyer of worlds. There is the Ultima Auriel, king of the gods and champion of the elves. The Akatosh we know is the one who made a covenant with Elysia to protect the mortal realm from the chaotic forces of Oblivion. I'm sure you can see just how much contradiction exists within this deity, and as a result of this contradiction, there is a theory that Akatosh is insane, fractured beyond reason. Now, imagine Jyggalag existing in Oblivion, trying to impose order and determinism on the vastness of the void. Failure is a certainty. There aren't many depictions of Jyggalag throughout the eras. Almost everything we have comes from the experiences of the Champion of Cyrodiil. But there is an image of Jyggalag transforming into Sheogorath from the Elder Scrolls Legends. It shows what we've already seen through the eyes of the Champion. But there's something about it. To me, it doesn't show two individual princes vying for control. It shows one god, one mad god, one schizophrenic god torn between order and chaos. He can shield his frail form within a suit of colourless armour, but that won't hide his madness, nor will it make him a different god. And as a brief aside, there are a few things about Jyggalag's followers that I find particularly interesting. And interesting is not normally a word I'd associate with this prince. Jyggalag is known for being stern, bleak and colourless, and these traits are perfectly demonstrated by his followers, the Knights and Priests of Order. It is theorised that the Knights of Order were once mortals. Sheogorath claims that they are lifeless husks, without a single original thought going on in their minds, and Daius hints that they are not quite the same as Daedra. The Priests of Order are simpler to understand. They were former citizens of the Shivering Isles that betrayed Sheogorath, instead choosing to serve Jyggalag. I believe the Knights of Order to be similar to the priests, in that they were inhabitants of the Isles who sacrificed their individuality in deference to the Prince of Order, becoming his mindless thralls. With this deterioration of their minds, their souls withered away, and their hearts turned to crystal. They had all the free will removed from them. Worshipping Jyggalag strips from you all the wonders created by the interplay of the primordial forces. Instead, his followers are as bland as Anu's unchallenged brightness. Is their devotion to perfect order not just another form of madness, akin to the rest of the Asylum's population? While almost everything relating to the Knights of Order is speculation, they do demonstrate just how hopeless it is to pursue logical order and deduction in Oblivion. To try it is to lose one's mind. And while we're speculating, I want to talk about Jyggalag's armour. The Greymarch begins, and Sheogorath transforms into Jyggalag. The same face lies behind the prince's nasal helm. That bar projecting vertically down across Jyggalag Sheogorath's face represents the dichotomy within him. The armour is perfectly symmetrical, and when combined with Jyggalag's great height, he looms over the Isles like a tower. I chose the word tower because there's a striking resemblance between the Prince of Order in his shining colourless armour and the towers of the mortal realm. The towers of creation stabilise the Mundus, serving as the pillars of Nirn. The towers of white gold and crystal lore were made in open emulation of Tower Zero, Adamantia, and I believe that Jyggalag 2 is an emulation of this tower. According to the Pocket Guide to the Empire, as the world congealed into reality, the gods made a great tower to discuss how best to proceed with the making of the Mundus. The physical, temporal, spiritual and magical elements of Nirn were set at this convention, and the tower itself remained behind as some of the gods disappeared into Aetherius. In his text, Orbic Enigma 4, Beradalmo the Signifier elaborates. The spike of Adamantia and its zero stone dictated the structure of reality in its orbic vicinity, defining for the Earthbones their story or nature within the unfolding of the dragon's time-bound tale. This tower, and those that came after, maintain order within the Mundus. They uphold the laws of time and nature, and keep the realm from unravelling, and being absorbed into the chaotic maelstrom of Oblivion. The Adamantine Tower stands as an obelisk of order in a realm of Sithis Lorkhan's design. The stone of the Jyggalag Tower could even be his sword, which transforms into the Staff of Sheogorath at the end of every march. This staff contains the power of the Shivering Isles, and loses its power when Jyggalag and his sword take control. I'm not actually suggesting that Jyggalag is a tower of creation, but the idea that he was inspired by Adamantia is plausible, especially when we look at one of the theories for how Sheogorath came to exist. According to varieties of faith in the Empire, contemporary sources indicate that his roots are in Aldmeri creation stories. Therein, he is born when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed. One crucial myth calls him the Sithis-shaped hole of the world. It's not unheard of for gods to be born during the tumult of Mundus's creation. For instance, it's also theorized that Hermaeus Mora was born from the thrown-away ideas used during creation. The commonly held myths tell that Trinomac reached into Lorkhan's chest, sundering him as he ripped the trickster's heart free. And another source, the Lunar Lorkhan, suggests that the removal of his divine spark split Lorkhan in two, creating the moons, his cloven duality. If Sheogorath was born from this separation, maybe Sheogorath was also divided into two parts, a side of order shaped like the tower upon which Lorkhan was punished, and a side of chaos, of trickery, creativity and madness. What's more, if varieties of faith is to be believed, then it contradicts Jyggalag's assertion that Sheogorath only exists as a result of the Daedric conspiracy against him. Every aspect of Jyggalag's sphere, and every claim he seems to make, is riddled with contradiction and confusion. His great library possessed documentation of everything that ever did, or ever will happen, and yet he could not see his own betrayal coming, if that betrayal happened at all. And Daius, his all-knowing chamberlain, made predictions about the Champion of Cyrodiil's failure that were proven wrong in real time, in 4K. Ultimately, Sheogorath burned this great library to the ground, insisting that it was an abomination, and that personal choice defied logical prediction. Perhaps it was Jyggalag himself, in his madness, that reached that conclusion. Sheogorath was just a voice in his head, another side of his personality. Jyggalag will never be free, no matter who comes along to supposedly free him from his curse. We've been led to believe that the Champion of Cyrodiil mantled Sheogorath, much like Haskell had in the past, and Jyggalag had been set free to sail the waters of Oblivion. But I believe this is a great big lie. Just as an aside, for anyone unsure of what the term mantling means, mantling is walking like them until they must walk like you. It is the process of achieving apotheosis by replacing another god, or taking on their mantle. The word mantle literally means to cloak or envelop, and in this context, you become a specific god, or that god becomes you. The difference between the mantler and the mantlee is up for debate, and it's unclear whether one can maintain their individuality in this process. I could go on, but I'll save the topic of mantling for when we discuss the walking ways. If Haskell's mantling of Sheogorath was anything like the Champion of Cyrodiil's, occurring in the midst of a previous era's Greymarch, why didn't that one set Jyggalag free? Sheogorath claims the champion can finally break the cycle, and why would Sheogorath lie? I believe the Greymarch will continue. As the cliche saying goes, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I believe nothing changes because Jyggalag and Sheogorath are the same entity and always have been, and any mantlers who come along just add to the growing list of voices in the Prince of Perfect Madness and Perfect Order's fragmented, schizophrenic mind. So as I sit here in the ruins of the Great Library of Jyggalag, or the Great Library of Sheogorath, whichever name you prefer, and await my audience with the Mad God, I do so with the belief that Jyggalag is not out there somewhere, but is right here in the Shivering Isles, presiding over his realm from his palace, unarmoured and using his other name, Sheogorath. There is a great deal more to explore on this two-faced prince, but that will have to wait until I meet the prince for myself. So, I'll end this video as I started it, with a quote from Daedric Morvain, 4th Tourbillon to the mainspring ever-wound sofa sill, who said, "Of the Daedra, only the Grey Prince of Order knew his nature, and he went mad in the knowing." Thank you so much for watching, and for joining me on this journey to the Shivering Isles. I hope to be back in Tamriel soon, lest I lose myself amidst the padded walls of Jyggalag's asylum. If you're new to the channel and want more Elder Scrolls lore, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to support the content even further, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. As always, only pledge if you can comfortably afford to. Thanks again for watching. My name is Drew the Daedrologist. You've been watching Drew Mora, and I'll see you in the next one.